part of my research looks at sort of local energy issues in Germany, and there in Germany, remunicipalisation has perhaps a clearer meaning than it might do here, because liberalisation and privatisation happened in Germany in a context where energy systems were largely governed by municipally owned companies, the Stadtwerke. In the UK, the history of energy development is very different. So the early development of energy networks was very competitive in the UK, and competitive in a bad way, in the sense that there was very little coordination, which meant that lots of sort of fragmented networks developed, and the efficiency of the systems were very low, because effectively networks demonstrate efficiencies of scale. So if you're not able to build out across a whole city, then the systems perform less well. So that partly then fed into the rationale for nationalising the energy systems after the Second World War. And the process of nationalisation effectively took local authorities out of the picture of sort of the development of the energy system. So there isn't a sort of a living memory of local authorities having been key players in the energy system in the way in which there is in other European countries. I wouldn't really describe it as a kind of a remunicipalisation drive. It's more that there are a variety of reasons why policymakers and people are interested in sort of trying to take local control or have a local influence, or at least derive some kind of local benefit from a transition to a low carbon future. So, I mean, there's sort of academic analysis of that. There's sort of various rationales for that, but one of them is that, particularly sort of coming out of analysis of the development of onshore wind, local communities object to onshore wind being sort of dumped in their environment, but if they are sort of an active stakeholder in that process, then the planning issues become a bit easier to get through. So it's something that I'm quite interested in, because my take on it, my sort of personal view on that, is that at the moment in Scotland and in the UK, the idea of local energy is very much kind of a niche kind of field, so that there are very sort of large-scale processes going on, and that a lot of energy system development, I think there are important reasons why local energy will become increasingly important if to have a successful sustainable energy transition, and those are challenges that we're sort of gearing up to tackle. But the way in which local energy has sort of been conducted so far has been quite sort of small scale. It's sort of like little opportunities to put some solar panels on a roof, or own 1 out of 25 wind turbines, that kind of thing. And that's partly driven by sort of issues of fairness. I mean, it's a sort of that sort of community participation in an energy project was important to us as the directors, that it had that sort of democratic kind of structure. But then, having said that, there are also, or at least were at the time when we set it up, certain tax advantages to doing that, because people investing in a co-op were eligible for relief on their income tax. And that's one of the ways in which that movement of energy co-ops has been criticised, that in some cases it can be read as being effectively just a financial vehicle rather than something that is sort of genuinely participatory and community oriented. But then there is sort of another sort of a question, kind of turning it back round. If your sort of question is, what is going to happen, or what is the structure of this kind of community energy going forward, that income tax break that I mentioned that our members were eligible for, one of the deadlines that our projects had to meet was that income tax break was being withdrawn, and so it's no longer available. So quite what that's going to mean for the sort of community energy sector going forward, whether it sort of continues down a cooperative route or something else, would be interesting to see. I suppose there is another sort of dimension of community energy, though, that is particular to Scotland in a UK context, which is quite interesting, which is in the sort of 1990s, and I think continuing to this day, there's been sort of a few campaigns about land reform, and so sort of access to ownership, and so for communities to be able to own the land that they live and work on, has led to some changes in legislation. I couldn't sort of recite to you exactly what they are, but it has meant that opportunities have opened up for communities to effectively buy out the land that their community is on, rather than sort of renting it from a feudal structure in perpetuity. So that's been quite interesting, because quite a few of those community development trusts have then sort of found themselves having borrowed some money to buy this land. They've got an opportunity because they now own the land, and they've also got something, they've got to find something to do, and perhaps also a liability to pay off. And that has been one of the driving forces behind renewable energy. So one of the really interesting, quite early projects was the Gear Development Trust. So Gear is a very small island on the west coast of Scotland that had a population of about 100, and the population was declining, and it was sort of the viability of it as a community was in doubt. And so they bought the island from a sort of an absent landlord, and then invested in 3 wind turbines. And the revenues from the electricity generated from the wind turbines pays off the mortgage that they had to take out on the land, and it also gives them a fund that they can use to improve the island. And that their story is that sort of turned around this population decline, and that it's become a viable community again because of having access to the revenues from renewable energy. Some of the interest in community energy, which is making sure that communities benefit from sort of these disruptive energy technologies, improves sort of acceptability. I also mentioned that as heat becomes decarbonised, that's potentially more disruptive to people's lives. Whether the same kind of structure is going to work to sort of handle those issues, as sort of a community sort of investment vehicle, or a sort of community sort of self-organisation around energy projects, there I'm a little bit more doubtful. And part of the reason for that is actually, so in terms of the history of the Edinburgh Solar Co-op, we weren't always a solar co-op. We used to be the Edinburgh Community Energy Co-operative, and the first project that organisation looked at was trying to develop a district heating scheme in the north of Edinburgh that would connect sort of a new development area with a deprived community, offering sort of lower cost heat, so it had sort of lots of benefits. But as the sort of the feasibility studies for that project progressed, it became apparent that the sums of capital that were required to sort of make that a viable scheme were pretty well beyond what we considered was sort of within the reach of that kind of structure, and so probably does need state investment effectively. So I'm hopeful, though, that doesn't squeeze out a role for communities, but perhaps that they could be involved in a different way. So if decarbonisation of heat means disruption to communities, it's going to have to be organised around a plan. So there's the creation of that plan could be structured as a sort of a participatory process, so that there is sort of community involvement. So we haven't actually done an analysis of who it was who invested, but I think this is quite common across these kind of, because there are a number of these kinds of solar co-ops in the UK. You do get some people who invest a lot of money in them, and you can only do that if you're very wealthy. But we do also have a fair number of members who, the minimum that we put out was £250, because if people were investing less than £250, then the administration of that would sort of swamp the project. But so we do have quite a few people who have invested £250. So I mean that's still, for some people, that's still quite a significant investment, and I recognise that The way that we've structured that means that there are certainly people in Edinburgh who couldn't afford to be part of the community, and I'm sad about that, and perhaps hopeful that we could use the Community Benefit Fund in a way that would sort of address that issue. Part of my personal rationale for pursuing the solar co-op as well, though, was that £250 to be an investor in solar is considerably less than if you're actually purchasing the panels yourself to go on your own roof. So I think that we kind of can argue that we've broadened access to investment in solar, if not having broadened it all the way down the sort of the chain of socioeconomic status.